Hey guys, tonight we're unraveling one of the most laid back little myths from ancient Greece, a tale where nothing explodes, no one turns into a tree, and the most exciting theft is resolved with a lullaby. This is the story of Hermes. Yes, that Hermes, god of travel, thieves, transitions, and probably the reason your keys are missing. But tonight, we're focusing on something quieter, something gentler. The time baby Hermes tiptoed away from his nap to invent a musical instrument. You probably won't survive this, because the idea of a newborn god casually escaping his cradle to go tinker with string instruments might be too adorable for your mortal heart to handle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Arcadia now, not the bustling version that poets later invented, filled with nymphs and flute-playing shepherds, but the older, colder one, wild, rocky hills, bare patches of earth, a wind that doesn't so much whistle as mutter, nestled in a shallow cave near the peak of Mount Cylene. You spot a figure, Maya, daughter of Atlas, swaddled in furs. She's just given birth to Hermes, and honestly, she seems exhausted, as one might be after bearing a divine trickster. Hermes, however, is not exhausted. In fact, he's remarkably active for someone only a few hours old. He wriggles. He tests the texture of his blankets. He squints at the shadows on the wall, not with fear, but with the curious dissatisfaction of someone already bored. He's not quite crawling. But there's definitely a squirm that says, give me 15 minutes and I'll be standing. This isn't just a story about magical birth. It's also about how Greek myths allow gods to sidestep logic. Hermes isn't just precocious, he's ready. Before dawn breaks, he's managed to wriggle away from his napping mother, plant both chubby feet on the ground, and toddle off into the landscape with the confidence of a minor god who knows the mountain better than the deer. Now, here's a mainstream fact you've probably heard. Hermes is the messenger of the gods, he of the winged sandals, quick-tongued, quicker-witted, and always a few steps ahead, but that's later. Right now, he's not delivering messages. He's wandering through early morning Arcadia with the patient determination of someone looking for something, anything. The world, to Hermes, is a playground made of potential materials. One of the more overlooked tidbits in this myth is the calm absurdity of it all. He's a baby. He hasn't even figured out full sentences. Yet here he is, taking in the scent of pine bark and the crunch of dry twigs underfoot, as if conducting research. His first major discovery isn't a grand philosophical truth or a hidden temple, it's a tortoise, now. There's no great fanfare here, no glowing light. The tortoise is just there, trundling along. Hermes squats down, tilts his head, and observes. There's something about the domed shell, the slow gait, the earthy sturdiness of it that speaks to him, not in a talking animal kind of way, just inspiration. The shell, he thinks, is hollow, resonant, useful, and this brings us to the gentle absurdity that classicists love to debate. Was Hermes's invention of the lyre a moment of divine genius, or the result of chaotic baby boredom? There's no agreement. Some argue He was fulfilling a divine purpose from the get-go, a born inventor, destined to be patron of artisans and messengers. Others suggest it's an accident of mythic improvisation, a god with too much time on his hands. The detail about the tortoise is real. By the way, the Homeric hymn to Hermes, our oldest source, states plainly that he killed the tortoise, scooped it out, and stretched strings made from sheep got across the empty shell to make music. But don't worry, this version is gentler. Let's just say he persuaded the tortoise to donate its shell to the arts. As fringe beliefs go, one Hellenistic group even argued that the tortoise didn't die at all, but was transformed into a constellation as reward for its contribution. That theory, charmingly unsupported by any evidence, is still my favorite, back in our caveside wander. Hermes now cradles his newly hollowed shell and plucks at strings he's tied with grass and dry sinew. The sound is twangy, imperfect, but it pleases him. He's invented something, not for conquest, not for grandeur, just music. Something to fill the silence between footsteps and starlight. The lyre would later become central to Greek culture, but right now, it's just a sleepy baby god sitting on a rock, completely unmonitored, gently strumming what sounds like a dream being born in real time, and somewhere far off, the sky begins to shift, not with storm or wrath, but with the slow turning of morning. Hermes looks up, the instrument resting in his lap, and he doesn't smile, exactly, but there's a kind of sleepy satisfaction in his expression, like he knows this isn't the last thing he'll make, just the first. You leave Hermes there for now, still perched on his rock, idly plucking that first lyre with the small, methodical fingers of someone who hasn't learned boredom yet. He'll be back. But for now, the focus shifts just slightly down the slope of the mountain, where the tortoise once toddled freely, and where Hermes, carrying his new instrument, begins his next unhurried exploration. This part of the story often gets skimmed over in flashier retellings. They leap straight from baby god, makes Lyre to Hermes steals cows. But here, we slow things down. There's a patch of moss that squeaks slightly when stepped on. The sun's just peeking above the horizon now, brushing soft lavender across the crags. Hermes doesn't rush. He never does. He pauses to examine a feather. He squats beside a cluster of lichen and flicks it, as if waiting to see if it will respond. It doesn't. Still, worth checking. The tortoise had not been selected at random. In ancient Greek cosmology, animals weren't just decorative, they held symbolic weight. The tortoise, in particular, was sometimes associated with the earth, with stability, and with quiet endurance. That a god of movement and mischief would choose this creature for his first tool isn't just ironic, it's almost poetic. Scholars debate whether this pairing was meant to express Hermes' balance between chaos and order. Others shrug and point out that a dome-shaped shell makes a great resonating chamber. Both are probably true. Here's the mainstream fact to hold on to the lyre. Hermes, built from that tortoise shell, became the prototype for the most iconic stringed instrument in ancient Greece. It would echo through temples, symposiums, and epic poetry for centuries. Yet its beginning is quiet, domestic, intimate. There is no thunderclap when the first note is played, just the gentle hum of sinew across bone, a music no louder than breathing. By mid-morning, Hermes has wandered farther, his bare feet padded with dirt and the light scratch of pine needles. The landscape around him is unpeopled but not lifeless. Bees buzz in loose spirals. A snake glides across a sun-warmed stone and doesn't bother him. The gods, even young ones, are rarely disrupted by nature. He hums a little as he walks. The tune is irregular, like he's still learning what music can do. He pauses again at a stream, not to drink, just to watch the way it threads between the rocks, murmuring in its own watery dialect. Water and sound, he thinks, are cousins. Both slip away the moment you try to hold them. But if you time it just right, if you pluck the string as the ripple breaks, you might catch something beautiful. This section of the myth contains a curious fringe detail that doesn't appear in the main Homeric hymn, but is whispered in later Alexandrian commentaries that Hermes tested the acoustics of the lyre in several places before deciding on its final shape. Some say he held it under waterfalls. Others claim he placed it inside empty amphorae to listen to the echo. None of these stories are provable, but they reflect a deep cultural truth. The Greeks believed the gods refined their inventions. Nothing divine came out perfect the first time. Even immortals tinkered. That idea, the god as craftsman rather than conjurer, is rare in myth. Zeus doesn't shape the thunderbolt himself. Athena doesn't carve her own statues. But Hermes gets his hands dirty. He tweaks, he tests, he listens, and in that quiet listening, he sets a precedent for human musicians that music isn't just sound, it's attention, pattern, practice, and sometimes pure whim, of course. None of this is spelled out in the myth itself. Hermes doesn't monologue his design philosophy. He just walks, carrying his lyre under one arm, occasionally stopping to adjust a knot or retune a string. The notes shift slowly from discordant twangs to something smoother. He plays the same handful of tones repeatedly, but in different orders, a kind of divine trial and error. Later philosophers would reinterpret this behavior. The Stoics admired Hermes as a figure of subtlety, someone who bridged gaps, not by brute force, but by curiosity. They pointed to this moment, wandering with the lyre, as symbolic of intellectual humility. Even a god, they argued, must wander before he masters something. That alone sets Hermes apart. Back in the forest, the trees grow denser. The light filters down in long, drowsy shafts. It's nearly noon, but Hermes doesn't seem to care. He walks like someone who's never had a schedule, which technically is true. Time hasn't started mattering to him yet. There's no sense of before or after, just the soothing loop of repetition step. Hum, pluck, adjust, and here comes the scholarly uncertainty. Why a lyre? Why not something simpler, like the panpipe, which is much older in archaeological record? Some theorists suggest the lyre was chosen precisely because it was new, exotic, meant to impress Apollo later on. Others believe the myth was retrofitted to explain the lyre's already important place in Greek music. Still others shrug, admit there's no satisfying answer, and enjoy the image of a baby god plucking stringed music from a turtle's back just because it's weirdly delightful. Eventually, Hermes finds a patch of grass beneath a slanted rock and settles in. He plays the lyre like it's always been part of him. The sound is no longer experimental. It's ambient, not meant to impress, not even meant to be heard. Really, just there. a background lull of notes that rise and fall with the breeze. And it's here, in this quiet, where we start to understand what kind of god Hermes will become. Not one who commands with volume, but one who slips ideas into the world through back doors, who steals attention not by shouting, but by making something quietly irresistible. The sun is higher now, dangling lazily overhead like a coin balanced on the rim of a bowl. Hermes doesn't mind the heat. If anything, he welcomes it, tilting his head back now and then to soak in the warmth like a lizard with a secret. The lyre rests comfortably in his lap, and though the strings are rough and still a little out of tune, the sound has matured. It's no longer just noise made by a baby with a clever idea. It's music, shapeless, meandering, hypnotic. You trail behind him as he walks again, this time toward a grove of olive trees. Their leaves shimmer silver in the light. They aren't sacred, not yet, but they hum softly when the wind moves through them. It seems right that he stops here. He settles beneath one of the trees and begins to play again. The music doesn't startle the birds. It weaves into their song, not louder, not competing, just joining. This is the moment the Homeric hymn to Hermes claims as the birth of the lyre in its truest form. Before this, it was just a shell with strings, but here, beneath the shade, with no audience and no goal, the sound changes. The notes thread together into something that could be called a melody. Not a song exactly, more like a suggestion of one. Here's your mainstream fact for the section. The lyre Hermes made became the standard for musical education in ancient Greece. It was taught to children, played at banquets, and considered essential for a proper upbringing, especially among the aristocracy. In Athens, learning to play the lyre wasn't a hobby. It was expected. They believed it trained both the body and the mind, rhythm for discipline, harmony for moral development. And it all began with this myth of a baby god and a tortoise shell. What's especially curious, though, is how the myth emphasizes crafting over performance. We don't hear much about Hermes' dazzling crowds. He doesn't debut the lyre at a grand party. He doesn't use it to win a contest or seduce a nymph. Instead, he just plays, alone, content, completely unconcerned with who hears it. There's a fringe version of this story, found in a fragment from the poet Pherecydes, who claimed that Hermes didn't invent the lyre in a single day. According to him, the tortoise-shell version was a prototype, and the god went through several iterations over weeks, adding new strings, testing different materials, even consulting bees for their hum. No one takes that version literally, of course, but it captures the same core idea Hermes as a quiet craftsman, not a grand showman. The word lyra itself, etymologically speaking, likely derives from a Semitic root, suggesting cultural borrowing or adaptation. It's one of the subtler debates in classical scholarship. Did the Greeks invent the lyre outright, or did they adapt it from neighboring cultures? Phoenician influences are often mentioned, but hard proof is elusive. The myth of Hermes seems to argue for divine originality, but the archaeology suggests something blurrier, a gentle collaboration across borders, like a song that passes from ear to ear and changes slightly each time it's heard. Hermes, meanwhile, remains undisturbed by this academic squabbling. He plays with his eyes closed, not asleep, just focused. The fingers of a newborn should not be this coordinated, and yet they move with deliberate grace. He plucks, he pauses, he adjusts tension by feel every few notes. He stops and listens, not just to the sound, but to the silence after. And then there's the unexpected turn, the moment that surprises even Hermes. A note slips into a new rhythm, almost by accident. It echoes against the nearby tree trunk and harmonizes with a cicada's call. It's not grand, not earth-shaking, but it's new. Something that wasn't there before now exists. And that, more than invention, is what defines creation in myth. Now comes a question scholars still argue about, and not always gently. Why did Hermes make the lyre before stealing Apollo's cattle? The order seems off. Usually, trickster gods play music after their pranks to charm their way out of trouble, but Hermes does it first. Some think this inversion is symbolic, that his music isn't a cover for mischief, but a parallel expression of the same energy. Music and theft, both ways of bending the rules, both arts of movement, timing, and delicate fingers. Others believe the order was originally reversed and later reshuffled in the retellings. The hymn we have isn't the only version that once existed, just the one that survived. And as with many myths, it was probably recited differently in different regions. One version for temples, another for drinking parties, and a third told softly by mothers to restless children, as a tale of a clever baby who made music from a turtle back in the grove. Hermes sets the lyre aside for a moment. He runs a hand over the shell, slowly, almost reverently. He hasn't named it, no divine proclamation, just a quiet recognition. This is something worth keeping, not for fame, not even for later use, just because it feels right. That alone makes it sacred. And now he stands again. No great flurry, no dramatic chord, just a gentle stretch, a yawn, and a slow walk toward the edge of the grove. He's not done with the day, not even close, but he's finished with the lyre for now. It's time to find something else to occupy his mind, something a little less gentle, something involving cows. You follow Hermes as he wanders down from the olive grove, the lyre still tucked under one arm like a child's comfort toy. But his attention has shifted now. There's a change in his step, not faster, not more determined, just curious in a new direction. The path curls gently between scrubby bushes and uneven stones, and though he walks alone, he's clearly not aimless. Hermes has decided to explore something different movement, mischief, and maybe a bit of culinary experimentation. He stops briefly at a patch of red clay and presses his toes into the dirt. Then, with an oddly precise instinct, he crouches down and picks up a dry olive branch. It bends but doesn't break. He sets it aside and gathers more. He's thinking, not in words, not yet, but in actions. He ties the sticks together with bits of grass and vine, shaping something rough and oddly hoof-like. Now, the mainstream version of the myth begins to kick in. Hermes has set his sights on the cattle of Apollo, sacred animals, radiant and well-fed, grazing far away in the meadowlands of Pieria. Why, that's part of the fun. He doesn't need them. He doesn't particularly like beef, but taking them, that's tempting. Not because he's cruel, because he's interested. The kind of interest that makes someone press every key on a harp just to see what happens. Here's your historical anchor for this section. Animal theft was a surprisingly serious theme in many Indo-European mythologies. Stealing sacred cattle, in particular, shows up from India to Ireland. It wasn't just mischief, it was a rite of passage, a way to prove cleverness, to challenge hierarchies. So Hermes is stepping into a very old, very cross-cultural role, the holy rustler. The fringe detail here is wonderfully strange. Some early sources claim Hermes created sandals for the cows and put them on backwards so their hoofprints would confuse any tracker. Imagine it. A baby god, hours old, wrangling divine livestock and carefully sliding custom footwear onto their feet, all while giggling softly to himself. Other versions simply say he made the cows walk backward, which is slightly easier to picture, but far less charming either way. The result is the same, a baffling trail, hoofprints that point in the wrong direction, an absence of broken branches or scattered hay. When Apollo eventually notices his cattle are missing, all he finds are inexplicable clues, like a divine prank left mid-play. Hermes doesn't just lead the cattle away. He herds them with the casual patience of someone who has no particular destination, just a vague idea that they shouldn't be where they were. He hums a bit, not the lyre tune, something more rhythmic, like a walking song with no lyrics. The cattle don't seem alarmed. They follow him like it's the most natural thing in the world. Meanwhile, scholars continue to debate whether this part of the myth was meant to be taken as literal thievery or symbolic transition. One school of thought says Hermes is performing a kind of boundary crossing ritual, removing sacred animals from their defined place to create a liminal moment. Another camp argues it's simply a joke. The gods, like humans, enjoy the occasional low-stakes heist. And then, of course, there's the Homeric hymn itself, which offers both sincerity and absurdity. It doesn't moralize, it doesn't punish, it just watches Hermes, tiny, grinning, barefoot, guide the cattle through narrow gullies and shaded paths until they're far from home. Along the way, he tests his new lyre on them, a few twangs, a pluck or two, and the cattle seem to walk more steadily, music as motivation. Not that they need it. These aren't rebellious cows. They're divine, placid, almost preordained to be stolen, as if the act itself is part of their function. Hermes eventually reaches a quiet spot near the river Alpheus. The grass is long, the air is still. He sets the lyre down and begins to prepare a fire, not with lightning or divine sparks, just a flint and some dry moss. He builds a circle of stones, arranges the sticks he collected earlier, and works patiently. Again, this isn't magic, it's craftsmanship, a god doing something slowly, methodically, by hand. Now here's the scholarly uncertainty for this section. What exactly did Hermes do with the cattle? The hymn says he slaughtered 2 and divided the meat into 12 parts, possibly symbolizing the 12 Olympians, even though he wasn't officially one of them yet. But did he eat it, offer it, store it? The text is oddly vague. One theory suggests the meat was meant as a proto-sacrifice, honoring a pantheon that had yet to formally include him. Another theory says Hermes just wanted to see what would happen if he lit a fire and cooked something, a divine experiment, like the lyre. But he doesn't eat the meat. That much is clear. He hides the remains, carefully, buries the bones, disguises the ashes. Then he wipes his hands, picks up the lyre, and plays a few notes as the smoke curls lazily into the sky. Not as a ritual, not as a cover up, just as something to do while thinking. And think he does. He knows Apollo will notice. He knows someone will come looking. But he's not worried. In fact, he seems a little amused by the inevitability. It's part of the rhythm, cause and effect, action and music, step and echo. Hermes doesn't fear consequences. He just folds them into the next tune. The sun has softened into late afternoon, the light more golden now, casting long shadows that stretch like lazy fingers over the hills. Hermes has returned to his cradle. The fire has burned low. The cattle are hidden. The lyre rests nearby, a gentle curve of tortoiseshell tucked into a fold of linen like a favored bedtime toy. And Hermes, he's curled up, blinking innocently, mouth slightly open, as if nothing at all has happened. Maya stirs beside him, none the wiser. After all, what trouble could a newborn cause? This is where the myth shifts again, where Apollo re enters the story, moving with the slow, puzzled irritation of someone who's misplaced something large and noisy. A few of his cattle have gone missing. The rest look vaguely confused. Their pasture is trampled, but the tracks make no sense. Some point inward, others loop. One set seems to walk backward. There's no sign of forced entry, no battle, no theft in the usual sense, just absence and weird footprints. Apollo, being Apollo, doesn't leap to conclusions. He studies, he inquires, and eventually he's pointed toward Arcadia, toward Mount Cylon, toward the cave with the sleepy infant and the very suspiciously full scent of wood smoke lingering in the air. Here's the mainstream historical anchor for this part in mythic hierarchy. Apollo represents order, light, logic, music, prophecy. He is structure, law, clarity. Hermes is none of those things. He is transition. He's ambiguity. He's the space between. This myth sets up their contrast early, not through battle, but through mood. Apollo confronts, Hermes disarms. The fringe detail some sources toss in here is that Apollo, when approaching the cave, didn't just come in blazing. He was initially confused, not because of the theft, but because of the music, according to one late hymn commentary, as Apollo approached. He heard Hermes playing the lyre and paused just outside the cave to listen, unknowingly charmed before he ever saw the culprit. No ancient source confirms this definitively, but it's appealing. Apollo's first reaction to his own cattle being stolen isn't rage, it's appreciation. What happens next is delightfully anticlimactic, a confrontation that unfolds like a polite debate. Apollo demands answers. Maya is flustered. Hermes is, well, Hermes. Still swaddled, it's still blinking slowly, denying everything. In one version, he claims he's been in his cradle all day and couldn't possibly have committed bovine larceny because, get this, he doesn't even know what a cow is. It's one of the earliest examples in Greek myth of the innocent face defense, and Hermes nails it. He doesn't lie with drama. He lies like a sleepy child who simply cannot be bothered. And Apollo, used to grand gestures and theatrical truths, finds himself momentarily outmaneuvered. That's the journey detail for this section, not movement through landscape, but movement through language. Hermes speaks in loops, not falsehoods, exactly, just sideways truths. He shrugs, he coos, he plays dumb so well it becomes an art form, now. Here comes the scholarly uncertainty. Why doesn't Apollo just know he's a god of prophecy? After all, why can't he just divine the truth? Some believe the myth is deliberately bending the rules of divinity to make room for Hermes' cleverness, that even the god's abilities must step aside in the face of wit. Others suggest Apollo does know, but allows the farce to play out because he's fascinated. Hermes isn't just stealing cows, he's introducing a new type of interaction into the pantheon, one based not on force or fate, but improvisation. Eventually, the charade grows too absurd to maintain. Hermes doesn't confess so much as deflect his way into partial admission. He offers a trade, not in words, but in music. He picks up the lyre again and begins to play. Not loudly, not theatrically, just a simple set of notes. Apollo listens, and everything changes. The hymn tells us that Apollo, hearing the lyre, falls in love, not romantically, but spiritually, with the sound, with the instrument, with the idea that something so small, so clever, so unexpected could produce beauty. Here's what classicists point out: this isn't a defeat. Hermes doesn't lose. He wins by reframing the moment. He doesn't beg forgiveness. He doesn't promise to behave. He gives Apollo something new, and Apollo, to his credit, accepts it. The god of structure recognizes the value in something freeform, and so, in a transaction that's never quite formalized, Apollo receives the lyre, Hermes gains a sort of older brother tolerance, and the theft becomes an origin story, not of crime, but of cooperation. By the end of the day, the sun is low again, golden light dappling the mouth of the cave. Maya still hasn't figured out what happened. Hermes hums softly. Apollo stands nearby, now holding the lyre, plucking its strings with an awkward reverence. The cattle have been returned. The ashes remain hidden, but no one seems to mind. No punishment, no thunderbolts. Just the quiet birth of a relationship between two very different kinds of gods, one radiant and orderly, the other slippery and strange, and the recognition that maybe, just maybe, they're better together. You're standing just behind Apollo now, watching him inspect the lyre like it might leap out of his hands or whisper secrets he's not ready to hear. The god of music, prophecy, and perfectly timed sunrises looks hesitant, not annoyed, not furious, just unsure what to do with this strange little shell strung with sheep gut. He lifts it carefully, tilts it slightly, then plucks one string. It hums, faint, crisp, honest. The lyre doesn't dazzle him, not immediately. It confuses him first. This is the point where things could have unraveled, where one Olympian, wronged and slightly embarrassed, might have turned a minor theft into a full-blown mythic drama. But that's not what happens. Instead, the air in the cave stills. Hermes, back in his cradle, but peeking one eye open, watches with something like satisfaction. The music is doing the work now. The mainstream truth of this moment is simple. Apollo accepts the lyre, and with it, a shift in mythological power. Before Hermes, music was already part of Greek culture. Flutes, harps, choruses. But the lyre becomes something more once Apollo holds it. It's not just an instrument, it's identity, a symbol of Apollo's grace, his calm precision, his ability to bring order from sound. But the myth insists he didn't create it. He received it from a baby who'd rather not be grounded. As Apollo strums again, something softens in his posture. He adjusts the strings with surprising delicacy. He's figuring it out, slowly, reverently. The notes don't form a song yet, but they hint at one, a melody he doesn't know, but already wants to finish. There's a curious fringe version of this myth, probably apocryphal, maybe invented by a bored Alexandrian scribe, that claims Apollo was so moved by the lyre's tone that he briefly wept, not out of sadness, just surprise. A god whose identity was tied to light and certainty, suddenly moved by something ambiguous and small. There's no mainstream source to support this tearful Apollo, but it's a detail that keeps resurfacing in late commentaries. The idea that music, unexpected music, can undo even the most composed immortal. Hermes, meanwhile, continues his game. He's not smug, he's not even fully awake, but when Apollo finally turns to him and asks where the instrument came from, Hermes responds with a shrug so subtle it might be a twitch. He doesn't explain, he doesn't take credit. He lets the music speak. This interaction becomes a model for divine diplomacy. Zeus, upon being summoned to mediate, doesn't roar or pass judgment. He watches the two of them, one god holding a lyre, the other curling tighter into his swaddle like a student pretending to nap in class. Zeus raises an eyebrow, asks a question or two, then sighs. It's the kind of sigh that means, well, I suppose no one died. The historical debate surrounding this moment is actually quite broad. Some scholars believe the myth was designed retroactively to explain why Apollo, not Hermes, became the primary god of music. Others think it represents a peaceful power transfer, symbolizing the necessary evolution from innovation to mastery. Hermes invents, Apollo perfects, and some, more romantically inclined, see it as a parable about art itself, how something new, weird, and slightly off-putting must pass through discomfort before being accepted. Apollo's initial hesitation isn't scorn, it's just unfamiliarity. The lyre doesn't match his golden ideal, but the more he plays, the more it becomes his, journey-wise. You barely move this section. The whole moment unfolds in the quiet space between gods. No epic flight, no storm, just posture, breath, and slowly developing trust. Hermes has tricked Apollo. Yes, but the trick isn't malicious. It's generous, a way of introducing an idea the other god might never have found on his own. And here's where we reach our scholarly uncertainty. Did Hermes mean to give the lyre away from the beginning? The myth doesn't say. There's no stated intention, no plan in the traditional sense. He could have kept it, could have hidden it, could have strung 10 more and started a band, but instead, he handed it off, or rather, let it be taken at precisely the moment when it would change someone else. Some thinkers argue this proves Hermes was always more than a trickster, that beneath the pranks and casual deception lies a kind of wisdom, a recognition that the best gifts are ones you're willing to lose. Others argue it's just another scheme, that Hermes traded his way out of trouble with perfect instinct and perfect timing. Either way, what matters is what happens next. Apollo doesn't just forgive Hermes, he embraces him, not in a dramatic hug, not with sweeping speeches, just a shift in tone. He starts calling Hermes brother. He smiles, a real one, and for the first time, the cave feels a little warmer. The baby thief, who built an instrument from a tortoise and a dream, has managed to alter the divine order, not with force, but with a lullaby. And as he finally lets himself drift back into true sleep, The faint sound of Apollo tuning the lyre continues in the background. It's uneven, hesitant, but growing stronger with each note. The tension has evaporated. The cave is quiet now, just the soft twang of strings being coaxed into tune and the occasional rustle of straw as Hermes shifts in his sleep. Satisfied, Apollo sits cross-legged near the fire pit, eyes closed, fingers idly exploring the new instrument as though trying to decode a dream someone else composed. Zeus didn't hand down a punishment. There was no thunderous trial, no fiery rebuke, just a gentle negotiation that felt more like a family meeting where everyone agrees not to mention the missing dessert. And in a rare display of divine restraint, the gods let this whole strange episode settle into history like it was always meant to be harmless, but officially, they still had to call it something. And so, a few hours later, perhaps over nectar and an agreeable breeze, Hermes was given a formal role herald of the gods, not as penance, not as reward, just a kind of cosmic acknowledgement that anyone clever enough to outmaneuver Apollo without causing permanent offense probably deserved a job title. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Hermes becomes the Charax, the divine messenger, guide of souls, protector of travelers, and god of transitions. His attributes shift accordingly. The winged sandals, the herald's staff, Kerykeion, or later, the caduceus. But it all starts here, in the aftermath of the Lyre. This quiet mischief becomes the resume that gets him hired. Scholars sometimes debate whether this moment is meant to represent a transition in Greek religious consciousness from the older, earthy gods of nature and instinct to a younger pantheon shaped more by communication, symbols, and thought. Hermes, as both trickster and translator, bridges that gap. He doesn't just carry messages, he embodies the idea of passage between mortals and gods, between sleep and waking, between one thought and the next. And here comes your fringe tidbit. One little-known Orphic hymn claims that when Hermes was granted his official title, he celebrated by crafting tiny golden sandals, not for himself, but for the tortoise shell, a gesture of thanks, maybe, or just a signature move. Hermes does seem like the type to add accessories after the fact. Back in the cave, you can feel something shift. Not physically, this is still a patch of mountain rock surrounded by trees and the hum of distant bees, but mythically, Hermes, still very much a baby, is now mythologically positioned for everything else he'll do: escort Persephone from the underworld, charm monsters with words, invent more things, some useful, some questionable, and generally keep the boundaries of the cosmos from hardening into boredom. Apollo leaves the cave with the lyre tucked under one arm, not like a weapon or a prize, but like a story he hasn't finished reading. And Hermes, he snores, just slightly. The straw shifts. A toe twitches. The baby thief, now the god of transitions, has earned his nap. Now here's the scholarly uncertainty for this section. Was Hermes's job appointment truly an elevation, or just containment? Some thinkers propose that Zeus didn't reward him out of admiration, but rather out of necessity. Give Hermes something to do, they suggest, and maybe he'll cause less chaos, structure the mischief, channel the energy, make him responsible for thresholds so he stops breaking them. Others argue the opposite, that Hermes's mischief is the very reason He fits this role. Who better to guide souls into Hades than someone who doesn't fear borders? Who better to carry messages than one who thrives in ambiguity? He's not being reined in, he's being let loose with a title. And that's what makes Hermes unusual in the pantheon. Most gods have domains: war, wisdom, harvest, wine. Hermes has roles. He's the god of between, not a farmer or a fighter, but the force that keeps things moving: trade, travel, speech, deception, charm. You don't worship Hermes to win, you worship him to get there. So much of Greek religion centers around clarity: who did what, when, and why. Hermes, from the start, resists that. He's elusive, not in a dark or scary way, but in a shrugging, sideways, let's try it this way kind of way. His myths don't end with moral lessons, they end with movement. And maybe that's why this story has lasted, not just because a god built an instrument out of a tortoise, but because it captures something quieter: the value of misdirection, the way a moment can seem small, playful, even pointless, yet become the thing that sets everything else in motion. The lyre, the theft, the trial, the joke, they all add up to a myth where no one wins, no one loses, and yet somehow everything changes. That's Hermes in a nutshell, or a tortoise shell. Outside the cave, twilight begins to gather. Apollo has disappeared down the mountain path, his footsteps fading. The cattle are back in their meadow, perhaps with stories of their own. And Hermes, he's dreaming again, of sandals that glide, doors that open, messages that never quite say what they mean. And somewhere beneath his cradle, the lyre hums faintly on its own, resonating not with sound, but with possibility. The mountain is quieter now, and the sun has slipped fully behind the hills. The shadows have grown long and velvety, and the breeze carries a cooler hush. You find yourself further down the slope, away from the cradle and the cave, in a patch of earth that seems unimportant, scrubby, dry, a little dusty. But this is where the lyre's influence starts to move beyond the gods. Hermes, newly promoted, now has more than one pastime. He doesn't just pluck strings and giggle anymore. He's a messenger now, which means he's out and about. But that lyre, he keeps it close, not as a tool of power, like Zeus's thunderbolt or Poseidon's trident, but as something useful in lulls, in pauses, in those long transitional spaces between actions. Ferryman queues, mountaintop waiting rooms, winding roads with no destination yet. It's in those empty stretches that music begins to travel. Here's your mainstream fact: the lyre became more than an instrument. In time, it became synonymous with a whole genre of Greek life: lyric poetry, unlike epic poetry, which focused on heroes and wars and large-scale glory. Lyric poetry was personal, introspective. It was sung with lyre accompaniment in symposiums, temples, and even private gardens. Hermes's invention wasn't just musical, it was emotional infrastructure. It gave people a way to sing about themselves. What's often forgotten is that this didn't happen in a rush. The lyre's spread was slow, much like Hermes's own pace when he's not causing trouble. There was no sudden decree, no everyone must play the lyre now law. It traveled the way stories do, one listener at a time. Someone saw a god playing it, tried copying it with a turtle of their own, told a friend, and before long, it was quietly everywhere. Now for a quirkier tidbit in one obscure inscription found near Tanagra. A local priest claimed that Hermes left behind the first instructional scroll for the lyre, which consisted of exactly one phrase: just keep plucking until it stops sounding awful. Is it a joke? Almost certainly. But someone carved it into stone, reverently, with little flowers around it. You move now through the foothills and villages, watching as the lyre begins to take root. It appears in the hands of shepherd boys, who play a few notes between rounding up goats. It hums softly in the room of young girls learning to sing before festivals. It leans against tavern walls, tuned poorly and played worse, but always welcome. No one plays it to impress. They play it because it fills silence the way a blanket fills a chill. One moment that stands out, tucked deep in a corner of late classical commentary, is the suggestion that Hermes never actually taught anyone to play. He just left it behind. And humanity, sensing it wasn't cursed or sacred or dangerous, simply picked it up. That, scholars suggest, is what made the lyre different from other divine gifts. It didn't require fear, it just required fingers and time. But not everyone agrees on the origin. Here's the scholarly uncertainty. Some ancient sources dispute Hermes as the inventor of the lyre altogether. A few pre-Homeric hymns hint at earlier gods, like Pan or even minor river spirits, as its true creators. The problem: no concrete records survive to back that up. It's more a literary echo than a claim. Still, it speaks to how myths are adopted, adapted, and softly argued over without ever truly being settled. What is certain is this: by the 6th century BCE, the lyre was everywhere, in homes, in temples, on coins, in childhood lessons. It was modest, portable, and quietly profound, unlike the flute, which was often tied to intoxication and frenzy. The lyre was associated with harmony and intellect, a musical embodiment of balance. Hermes, true to form, never demanded credit. He let Apollo take center stage as the god of music, and Apollo, though brilliant, always played an instrument invented by someone else. That's the dynamic. One god shines, the other set up the lighting. And now, if you listen closely, you might hear a pair of older poets debating this very fact at a symposium. One argues that the lyre teaches discipline, its notes fixed, its rhythm stable. The other counters that the lyre's invention was a prank, and that every beautiful song ever played on it is an echo of that joke. Neither is wrong. Hermes contains both truths. The journey style detail for this section is light, just the slow migration of a sound from mountaintop to village to hearth. No hero's quest, no temples raised, just the soft rhythm of fingers on string, moving from hand to hand like a whispered story. And through it all, Hermes moves, too. You might glimpse him on the edge of a festival, nodding faintly at a boy playing the opening notes of a song he doesn't know he knows, or walking beside a traveling merchant who strums a cracked lyre while counting paces. Hermes doesn't interrupt, he doesn't perform, he just passes through, because that's what he does best. Now the air is cooler, thicker, touched by the blue of twilight. You're in a stone courtyard tucked behind a modest villa, not one of the grand estates or marble showpieces, just a quiet home in a smaller polis, where evening has coaxed the last rays of sun onto faded wall murals and olive trees flicker in the wind. Inside, a group has gathered. It's not a ceremony, no garlands, no priests, just friends and neighbors reclining on woven mats, sipping watered wine from clay cups, talking idly about trade routes and whether the moon seems fuller than usual tonight. And in the center, someone is playing the lyre, not performing, just strumming lightly while others speak. It isn't the focus, it's the backdrop. And that's exactly the point. This is the world Apollo helped build, but Hermes got it started. Here's your mainstream historical detail. Apollo became the official god of music, and his association with the lyre became canonical. He was depicted with it in sculpture, honored with it in theater, and invoked with it in rituals. But Hermes always lingered around the edges of that story, not as a rival, but as a kind of silent founder. He was rarely depicted playing music himself in classical art, but his fingerprints remained on the object itself. You see it here, too, in the way people play, not with grandeur, not to impress the gods, but because it feels good to create something small and steady at the end of the day. A string of notes to match the rhythm of someone else pouring wine, a quiet tune to fill the gaps in conversation. Some philosophers argued that this was Hermes's greatest gift, not the lyre itself, but the idea that sound could exist without a purpose, that you didn't need to conquer, praise, or mourn. You could just hum, and that too was sacred. Now for a fringe detail that's too charming to ignore, one Hellenistic source, anonymous, probably meant as satire, claims that Hermes once snuck into a symposium disguised as a minor poet and introduced a completely ridiculous song about a snail who loved a fig tree. No moral, no mythic meaning, just a weird, wandering melody that made everyone laugh. The writer insists the lyre sounded particularly smug that night. No surviving fragment of this song exists, but it's referenced again centuries later by a Roman writer who calls it the Song of the Sideways God. Whether Hermes really composed such a tune is debatable, but the myth survives, not as fact, but as feeling. You move now to another symposium, this one slightly more formal. The wine flows a little faster. The guests are better dressed. One man recites a few verses of Sappho between sips, while another debates the structure of a new ode. But even here, among poets and thinkers, the lyre remains humble, passed between guests like a shared thought, played poorly by some, expertly by others, but never hoarded. It belongs to the group. And that leads to a scholarly uncertainty that continues to surface. Why? If Hermes invented the lyre, did it become so firmly tied to Apollo in the cultural imagination? Some argue it's because Hermes was too messy a figure, too ambiguous, too prone to stealing things or lying about goats. Apollo, with his clear boundaries and sunlit certainty, made for a better poster god. Others think the shift was narrative convenience. Apollo was already the patron of prophecy and poetry. Giving him the lyre unified the domains. Still, there's always that lingering sense, especially among lyric poets, that Hermes knew something about music that Apollo never quite grasped. Not the structure, not the melody, but the mood, that fuzzy in-between space where notes don't need to resolve and silence is as important as sound. Your journey-style detail here is barely a movement, just a slow pan across time and place. Lyre in hand, it sits in the lap of a sailor resting between voyages. It rests in a corner beside the loom, plucked once or twice by a child waiting for her mother in each moment. Hermes is near, not watching, not judging, just present, the god of thresholds, watching how sound slips between moments and makes them feel less lonely. By now, the instrument itself has changed. More strings, better craftsmanship. Some use bone instead of shell. Others add decorative carvings of dolphins or ivy. But the shape remains a crescent, a curve, a suggestion of something ancient and unassuming. And in these small scenes, you begin to understand the lyre's real power, not to dazzle or dominate, but to dwell, to exist comfortably in the background, shaping the air around it without needing applause. Hermes doesn't need temples for the lyre. He doesn't ask for festivals. The music spreads because it suits the way people live, slowly, imperfectly, in rooms filled with overlapping voices and unfinished stories. Somewhere outside this courtyard, the stars have begun to gather. The music continues, not loud, not insistent, just steady. A heartbeat made of string, a god's quiet pastime becoming humanity's favorite noise. You've wandered now into a shaded colonnade just off the agora, a place where words move faster than footsteps and debates bloom with the sharpness of olives in late summer. There's a low hum of conversation here, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the occasional clink of ceramic against stone. And over in the corner, half forgotten and entirely relaxed, sits Hermes, not in disguise, not drawing attention, just quietly tuning a lyre, as if the world might forget him for a moment, and that would be just fine. This is no accident. Hermes doesn't fade into obscurity. He folds himself into spaces where attention isn't required, and while others are arguing over trade laws and market taxes, he plucks out a chord progression that mimics the rhythm of sandals on marble. Here's your mainstream anchor by the classical period. Hermes wasn't just the god of invention or mischief. He had acquired formal responsibilities, messenger of the gods, guide of souls into the underworld, patron of commerce and language. But unlike most gods, Hermes doesn't loom. He weaves. His presence is found in the in-betweens paths, markets, moments before decisions. And oddly enough, he becomes something of a cultural hero among poets and orators. They admired his cleverness, his ability to say just enough, but never too much. Some even called him the god of rhetoric, not officially, but in passing, with a grin. After all, he made music from a tortoise. Surely he understood timing. Now for the fringe detail, an Athenian schoolmaster named Cleon reportedly taught his students that Hermes invented not just the lyre, but metaphor. He told them the lyre was a metaphor that became literal, turning the mundane, a tortoise shell, into the divine music. That sounds suspiciously like a justification for under-preparing a lecture, but still, it stuck. Several generations of rhetoricians took it as a given. Hermes made poetry possible by showing that anything can mean something else. You stroll with him now, not toward a temple, but through a narrow lane flanked by market stalls. He doesn't walk like a god, more like a friend who's been here before and wants to show you where the good figs are sold. He pauses occasionally, tipping his head toward the sound of someone reciting lines in a dusty square, and when a boy stumbles over the meter, Hermes smiles, not mockingly, but as if to say, "You'll get it next time." The scholarly debate that threads through this part of the myth isn't about Hermes' invention, but about his influence. Did Hermes, as some claim, truly inspire the poetic form known as the eponychion, the lyrical celebration of a hero's deeds? Or is that just another layer of attribution stacked on centuries later? When scholars got generous with connections, there's no direct evidence, just hints. But those hints are enough to keep him present in the margins of every scroll. Meanwhile, Apollo has fully embraced his role. His temples echo with choral hymns. His priesthoods have formalized music education. He is divine clarity, precise melody. And yet, the memory of the lyre's origin never fully fades. In some carvings, you'll find Apollo holding the instrument while Hermes peeks from behind a pillar. Half visible, it's symbolic, they say. Hermes steps back so the music can shine. But you and I know better. Hermes isn't hiding, he's listening. This is your journey moment, not through geography, but through public spaces. You visit a symposium where a philosopher attributes his best idea to a dream in which Hermes whispered a phrase. You pass a school where children learn the basic notes of the lyre before they learn arithmetic. You stand at the edge of a court where an orator, caught off guard, stumbles through a defense and mutters under his breath, "Where's Hermes when I need him in all of this?" Music becomes less about entertainment and more about memory. The sound of the lyre becomes associated with ease, with presence, with knowing what to say before the silence becomes awkward. Hermes, god of transitions, becomes the patron not just of moving between places, but between thoughts, between moods, between lines of a verse when the next word hasn't quite arrived. And now the scholarly uncertainty, did Hermes ever play the lyre again after giving it to Apollo? The myths are quiet on this. They suggest he didn't, that the gift was final. But scattered throughout minor poetry, there are implications, moments when someone hears a melody in the woods, soft and strange, and claims it must be Hermes, a tune not meant for applause, just an idea, softly humming to itself. As night settles over the city and oil lamps flicker to life, Hermes leans once more against the edge of a column. He hasn't said much. He rarely does. But the lyre rests beside him, not in his hands, not being played, just near, as if to say, if needed, the music is still there, and maybe, if you're quiet enough, you'll hear it. Not the melody itself, just the echo of invention, still strung, still waiting. You find yourself farther from the cities now. The stone colonnades and bustling agoras are behind you. Instead, you walk along a path barely wide enough for two, winding between rolling hills and scattered fig trees. There's a distant hum of insects, occasionally, the faint jingle of a goat's bell. The pace of everything here is slower, less urgent, like the land itself has leaned back to enjoy a break. Hermes has been here too, maybe recently, maybe long ago. It's never entirely clear with him. In these rural areas, far from the shrines of Apollo or the formal music schools of Athens, the lyre has taken on a life of its own. It's smaller now, more worn, patched with twine or bone, played beside cooking fires and on long walks. Not to impress, but to fill the spaces in between chores. It isn't taught with precision. It's passed down, shown, not explained. A gesture, a shared laugh, a half-remembered tune that becomes the family version, however off-key. Here's your historical anchor for this stretch of the myth's influence in rural Greece. The lyre never truly disappeared, even into the Hellenistic and Roman periods. Small communities continued to use simple, stringed instruments derived from Hermes's original model, while elite culture might have shifted toward more elaborate instruments like the kithara. The lyre persisted, stubborn, humble, and easy to fix with a knife and some sinew. And in that persistence, scholars find something oddly profound. Hermes's music, while never the most polished, was always the most portable. You didn't need a conservatory. You didn't even need a room. Just a breeze, a bench, and a few notes you half knew how to play. One fringe source, a rustic hymn fragment attributed to an otherwise unknown poet named Myros of Delos, claims that Hermes preferred these rural players, the ones who tune by feel, not by pitch, the ones who forget a note and make up something better. It's probably apocryphal. It might even be a parody. But the sentiment fits. You pass a shepherd now, seated on a flat rock, tapping a rhythm against his knee as he mends a fence. His lyre leans nearby, not as a tool of art, but as a companion, something to reach for during pauses. He doesn't notice you, or if he does, he assumes you're just passing through, like most things here. This part of the journey isn't grand, it's granular. You're not watching a god reshape the heavens. You're watching people keep something alive without knowing where it came from. And Hermes, being Hermes, wouldn't want it any other way. There's a scholarly uncertainty here that scholars don't so much debate as quietly sidestep. Was Hermes meant to be remembered this way, as a background god, as the one who starts things but never insists on credit? The textual evidence is slim. The mythic focus always turns toward Apollo's perfection, Dionysus's passion, Athena's intellect. Hermes, he lingers in the footnotes, the one who passed through, rearranged something subtle, and left. But there's power in that, more than most gods. Hermes trusted others to carry his ideas forward. He gave up the lyre not because he was done with it, but because he knew what came next, didn't need him. That quiet trust, scholars suggest, is why Hermes becomes the patron not just of music or trade or language, but of invention itself. Not invention as in grand machinery or weapons, but the soft, domestic kind, a new way to stir grain, a slightly better knot, a lullaby that calms a child, even though the words make no sense. And this brings us to the journey-style immersion for this section, a simple footpath through dusk-lit countryside, past villagers preparing evening meals, children calling to each other, and the occasional strain of a single lyre note floating out of an open window. Hermes is there, too, not visibly, not in full god form, maybe just in the way a door creaks open at the perfect moment, or how a rhythm starts up with no clear beginning. His presence doesn't announce itself, it suggests. In one farmhouse, a woman plucks 3 notes between cutting herbs. In another, a boy hums a phrase he heard once in town and doesn't realize he's altered it. No one writes these moments down. No one traces them back to a cave on Mount Silene, but they all share something of music that moves sideways, patiently, like its original creator. And you, too, feel it now. The way the lyre's sound lingers not as a performance, but as a habit of listening, a readiness for rhythm, a softness that invites repetition. This was never about art, not really. It was about finding shape in idle time. Music not to proclaim, but to accompany. A god made that possible, and then he walked away. You've wandered into a courtyard dappled with sun and echo, where the breeze carries the scent of clay, sweet wine, and stories half finished. It's quieter than the agora, more deliberate than the countryside. Here, poets gather not the loud, performative kind with laurels in their hair, but the ones who sit with their backs to pillars, scribbling gently and humming to themselves. And in the far corner, Hermes appears, not as a god descending in brilliance, but as a man leaning on a cane that might just be a flute in disguise. He listens, that's all, because this moment isn't about him, it's about what came from him. This section is all about Hermes and the poetry crowd, those thinkers, singers, and slow speaking wanderers who found something sacred in what he started. The mainstream historical fact here is this: Hermes was deeply associated with eloquence, wordplay, and the invention of both speech and writing. Though not credited as the god of poetry, that honor went to Apollo and the Muses. Hermes was the one many poets thanked when their metaphors landed, when their similes didn't fall flat, when a sentence came together on the fourth try. He was the god of getting it out, not perfectly, not beautifully, just finally. In symposiums, those casual evening gatherings where wine and wit mixed freely, Hermes often turned up in toast and whisper. The speaker might raise a cup and murmur, "Let Hermes lend me cleverness." Before daring to recite a verse, it wasn't superstition, it was tradition. You don't perform without first asking the god of delivery to make sure your voice doesn't crack. And here's your fringe tidbit in a lesser-known comedic fragment from a lost satyr play. Hermes is depicted interrupting a poetry contest by swapping out everyone's scrolls and then pretending it was a test of improvisation. A real poet, he says, should always be ready to lie and rhyme. That line was scratched onto the walls of at least 3 known wine cellars in Attica. Apparently, it stuck. You stroll now among these poets. Some play the lyre while murmuring half-rhymed odes. Others recite epigrams without music, but tap their feet in unconscious rhythm. Hermes still present, even without strings, and always. The sense that words themselves are being tested, stretched, bent, not broken, just made elastic enough to do something new. That brings us to a scholarly uncertainty that still lingers in academic circles. Was Hermes the god of poetry, or merely the god of poets? The distinction matters. Poetry implies structure, meter, artistry. Poets, they're just people trying to get a thought across without sounding foolish. Some scholars argue that Hermes is the god of delivery, not design, that he didn't create the art, but created the ability to share it. Others argue that's splitting hairs. In a world where recitation was everything, to be the god of communication was to be the god of poetry. Without Hermes, the lyre doesn't get built, the hymn doesn't get sung, the message doesn't reach its audience. And maybe that's the truest form of poetry, not the perfect phrase, but the one that actually gets heard. You pause beside a young poet, reciting lines to the wall, no audience, just repetition. The words aren't remarkable. Something about a harvest, a lost sandal, a girl named Themis who smelled like mint and cedar. But the cadence holds, and when he stumbles, he doesn't curse Apollo. He chuckles and mutters, "Hermes, you trickster," before starting again. That's the journey-style moment here, a slow meander through minds at work, not genius erupting from the heavens. but cleverness coaxed from quiet corners. Hermes isn't an inspiration lightning bolt. He's the nudge, the wink, the idea that shows up when the scroll's nearly torn in frustration, and the lyre still there, passed from hand to hand, not always in tune, not always even played, sometimes just held, like a mnemonic device, reminding the poet to pause, breathe, and say it differently. In one corner of the courtyard, a woman strums while composing a hymn to Persephone. Her words aren't polished, but there's something in the way she repeats a line, changing one word, then another, that makes it memorable. Hermes would approve. He believed in first drafts, even third drafts, if they got you where you were going. A final oddity worth mentioning, a surviving papyrus fragment from Oxyrhynchus contains what appears to be a poet's prayer, addressed to Hermes alone, not the muses, not Apollo, just Hermes. It reads, "Let my tongue not outrun my thought. Let my fingers find their place. Let the rhythm carry meaning, even when the meaning hides. No one knows who wrote it." But it's been quoted in several academic journals as the earliest example of a poetic invocation to Hermes. As dusk settles in, the courtyard fills with low conversation and unfinished lines. The lyre plays a few more notes before being set gently aside, and somewhere nearby, Hermes disappears, not dramatically, just fades from sight like a thought at the edge of sleep. Because this wasn't about him, it never really is. The stars are thick now, dusted across the sky like crushed pearls on dark velvet. You've drifted farther still, past cities and courtyards, beyond symposiums and olive groves, to the kind of place that doesn't show up on maps. Just a clearing near a river, moonlight slipping through the trees, and a single sound that draws you closer music. But not the lyre, not exactly. It's softer, breathier, a different shape, a different voice, pipes, and there, lounging beside a lazy bend in the water, is Hermes again, older now, or at least older in the way gods get when they've outgrown the drama of their own stories. He's made something new, something with reeds and twine and a faint, laughing wheeze. This, it turns out, is the god's other pastime, gently crafting new instruments, one quiet invention is at a time. Here's your mainstream fact. While the lyre was Hermes's most famous invention, he was also associated, sometimes directly, sometimes through association, with the creation or inspiration of other instruments, particularly the syrinx, or panpipes, though more often credited to the god Pan, who shaped the first syrinx from reeds and longing. Hermes's connection lingers in the background, tied to his role as an instigator of sound. He wasn't a one-instrument deity. He was a source, the one who reminded mortals and gods alike that if something made a noise, it could probably be turned into music. The fringe detail here comes from a rare commentary on Callimachus that Hermes, upon seeing Pan's reed instrument for the first time, didn't just admire it, he quietly copied it, made a smaller version, and left it in the hands of a mortal boy who'd never heard of either god. That boy, the commentary says, became the first to play lullabies to goats, again, probably apocryphal, but it fits the tone. Hermes didn't crave recognition. He just liked when things worked. You sit now beside him, or at least where he was. The reeds he used lie scattered, damp and half-woven. You pick one up. It hums faintly when you blow across it, not a melody, just a whisper of potential. That's Hermes all over. There's a scholarly uncertainty in this stretch. Too, did Hermes actually invent the panpipes, or was that association developed later? As his mythos expanded, most classical sources attribute the instrument to Pan, but Hermes' title as a patron of travelers, herders, and roadside musicians makes the overlap natural. Instruments didn't always need a single god. They moved through stories like props in a traveling play, changing hands, changing names. That's what you see here. Not ownership, not rivalry, just transference. Back in the clearing. A traveler approaches. He's young, sunburned, carrying a water skin and a bundle of herbs. He finds the scattered reeds, picks one up, and experiments. A squawk, a wheeze, a hesitant, tuneless puff of air, then something almost sweet. He smiles, not because he knows who left it, but because it feels like it was meant for him. That's how Hermes operates now, not with declarations or golden gifts, with hints, with half-finished ideas that others are meant to complete. And this is your journey-style moment, the reeds whispering in the wind, the traveler unknowingly entering into a tradition that stretches back to tortoise shells and backward cattle hooves. The music isn't beautiful, not yet, but it's becoming, and that, Hermes seems to say, is the point. Elsewhere, others are experimenting too. Shepherds hollowing out bones to make flutes, market girls drumming on amphorae with sticks, a sailor tying cords across a gourd and plucking it on long voyages. No gods appear in these scenes, no miracles, just a quiet thread connecting them, a subtle permission to make sound. And Hermes, though not seen, is felt. He's the flicker in the corner of the eye when someone strikes the right note by accident. He's the breeze that bends a reed just enough to resonate. He's the god of process, not performance. A few philosophers, especially the Stoics, tried to argue that Hermes represented pure rationality, that invention without intention was chaos, but they always seemed uneasy about it. Too many of Hermes's creations didn't solve anything. They didn't defend cities or inspire conquest. They were just pleasant, temporary, useful only because they made time pass more softly, even now, lying beside the water. You get the sense that Hermes wouldn't mind if the reed floated away tomorrow. He'd just find something else, a hollow acorn, a fishbone, a cluster of icicles. Oh, if he could make them sing. His creativity isn't tied to legacy. It's tied to what's nearby. That's what poets miss. That's what scholars can't quite pin down. Hermes doesn't invent to impress. He invents to accompany. And if it happens to last, that's fine. But if it doesn't, there's always another tortoise. By now. The night is deep and easy. The stars no longer shine. They glow, slow and content, as if they too have begun to drowse. The world feels settled, but Hermes, true to form, never quite stops. You catch up with him again, not by sight, but by presence. A shift in the air, the faintest breeze, the sense that something's just moved past you, even though the leaves haven't stirred. This is the part of the story where Hermes' music fades not from memory, but from need. The lyre, the panpipes, the playful rhythms, they've all taken root in mortal hands. His instruments are no longer his, they're the world's now. And Hermes, who never stayed long in one place, has turned his attention to other transitions. Now, he moves between realms. Here's your mainstream historical fact. One of Hermes' oldest and most enduring roles was Psychopompos, the guide of souls. When someone died, it was Hermes who gently led them to the underworld, not Hades, not Charon. Hermes came first. No dramatics, no judgment, just a hand extended, a path shown. It's one of the most quietly profound aspects of his mythology. The god who invented the lyre, who tricked Apollo, who snuck around with sandals and clever smiles, is also the one who walks beside the dead, not with ceremony, just with presence. And here's the fringe belief that slipped into late Orphic hymns and a few odd regional cults. Some believed Hermes used music to guide souls, not with words, not with command, but by playing a single, repeating phrase on a lyre or a flute or a breath of wind through hollow reed. The idea was that the soul wouldn't follow an order, but would drift gently toward the sound. The music didn't pull, it invited. There's no strong textual evidence for this, but it appears again and again in funerary art, where Hermes is shown holding an instrument rather than his staff, and in one fragmentary vase painting, the strings of his lyre are painted as loose lines that stretch into the stars. That brings us to your scholarly uncertainty. Why was Hermes chosen as guide of souls? Some argue it's because of his speed, his ability to move between worlds. Others say it's because he had no fear of boundaries, that he belonged in thresholds, and death was just another one. But a few scholars suggest something more emotional, that Hermes was given the role because he didn't judge. Most gods were too grand, too invested in outcomes. Hermes didn't care where you came from. He just wanted to make sure you got where you were going. You follow him now, not into Hades, but toward one of those quiet borderlands the Greeks never mapped. A grove with trees that don't flower, but whose leaves always seem to fall. The soil is soft. The air smells faintly of cedar and dust. Hermes is alone, but not lonely. He walks with the careful rhythm of someone who knows every step matters, even if it leads nowhere grand. In his hands is a lyre, not the original, of course, but one of its many children, a little scuffed, one string slightly off, and as he moves, he plays a pattern so simple it could be a mistake. But it's not. It's deliberate, meditative, a sound that says it's okay to keep walking. And that's the journey style immersion here. No dramatic arc, just a god moving quietly through a space most fear to enter. The music is no longer about entertainment. It's not even about creation. It's about comfort. There's an account from a 2nd century BCE funerary ritual on Delos where the priest, invoking Hermes, said let him arrive with the lyre in his hands. So the path is marked with song. That line, carved into a weathered marble tablet, is one of the few surviving references to musical accompaniment during ancient Greek burial rites. It makes sense. The god who once strummed tunes to cover up the smell of roasted cattle now uses melody to soften the silence of death. And when you think of it that way, it all aligns. The lyre, built from death, shell, and sinew, was never about triumph. It was about transformation, a reminder that something discarded can still resonate, that endings hum. Hermes continues walking, no audience, no temple, just the path and the stars and the soft, repetitive lull of strings played not for applause, but for direction. And just before he fades again, you realize the lyre was never the point. Movement was, and Hermes god of thresholds, continues to walk because every ending is just the edge of something quieter. The world has grown still. Even the wind, once so full of mischief, now moves slowly, if at all. The stars are fading, not from brightness, but from your awareness of them. Shapes blur, thoughts soften, and in this quiet, final stretch, Hermes slows too. He's no longer guiding, or crafting, or charming anyone out of their sandals. He's sitting on a flat stone at the edge of a field that may never have had a name. The grass around him stirs once, then settles. The lyre lies across his lap. He doesn't play it. He just traces the shape of it with one finger, as if remembering how it came to be. This is the wind down, the moment when the myth doesn't end, but simply stops telling itself aloud. Here's your final mainstream historical note. The lyre, as Hermes left it, became one of the most enduring symbols of Greek identity. It was printed on coins, etched into pottery, offered at weddings and funerals, and long after the belief in gods faded. The instrument remained. You can still hear echoes of it in classical guitar, in lullabies, in the way we use silence to shape a sentence. But none of that matters now, not really, because the story isn't about legacy. It's about the moment before sleep. There's a quiet fringe idea that some early followers of Hermes held in formal midnight rituals. Not prayers, not chants, just walks. They'd drift through gardens or paths under the stars, carrying nothing, saying nothing, just listening, waiting to hear what the god might say in the pause between thoughts. Some said they heard music, others said they didn't, but felt less alone. And now the scholarly uncertainty was Hermes ever meant to be a comfort, or did we make him one? Retroactively, the answer, as usual, doesn't matter. Hermes was never about conclusions. He was always about the middle, the passage, the part where you aren't sure if you're awake or dreaming. Tonight, the lyre will not be played, not because it's forgotten, because it's resting, because it's done enough. You lie back now, letting the image of the god fade into starlight. His figure is barely visible, like a dream you didn't mean to remember. The night doesn't feel empty. It feels held, as if all the quiet he ever carried in his footfalls is now pressed gently around you. And here, we drift together into the final wind down. There's nothing left to discover tonight. The air is soft. Every sound is wrapped in stillness. And Hermes, always on the move, has finally stopped, not because he ran out of things to do, but because even messengers need sleep. You don't need to remember the shape of the lyre. You don't need to recall the stolen cattle, or the clever sandals, or the confused sun god. Those were just the folds of the story, creases in soft linen, gently smoothed by the hands of time. Now there's only the hush, the kind that follows a lullaby, when the strings go still and no one rushes to speak, the kind that gathers at the edges of your thoughts, pulling gently, coaxing you inward. Hermes isn't here to lead anymore. He's just nearby, like the last breath of a candle before it dims, or the faint rhythm of footsteps that never quite touch the ground. You don't need to get anywhere. You don't need to decide what happens next. This moment is the message, and all it says is, let go, unclench, ease, drift. Let your thoughts unspool like loose string, with no need to reel them in. Let your breath find its own slow rhythm, and let the music, that old, warm, wandering sound, fade completely. You're safe now, not because of walls, not because of rules, but because this story asks nothing of you. No lesson, no task, just a gentle, meandering invitation to rest. You made it here. You've heard enough. It's time now to sleep.